We got to talk about politics in the Supreme Court, and it's a pleasure to welcome back to the program Elizabeth Slattery, who's a legal fellow with the Heritage Foundation at the Institute for Constitutional Government. Elizabeth, good to have you back on the program. And why is it that we see people, mostly from the left, still trying to politicize the Supreme Court?
Well, thanks for having me. And, of course, the latest reason the court is in the news is because of the Wisconsin election this week, and that in a last-minute ditch effort, the Democrats in Wisconsin tried to postpone the election, and it ended up going all the way to the Supreme Court, which said, look, the state legislature had to act, and it didn't. The governor didn't ask the legislature to act early enough, and so we've got to, pandemic or not, we've got to follow the procedure that's on the books.
You know, it almost sounds like the decision, I know this is going back a ways to 2000 with Gore versus Bush, where Florida, effectively, there were people in Florida saying, hey, let us count the votes differently than the law allows us to count them. Let's change the rules in the middle of the game. And the Supreme Court weighed in there, too, and said, nope, you got to follow the rules that are on the books. And you don't get to change the rules of the game in the middle of the game, to use a sports analogy. And yet you see people like Schumer and others who are openly, I know some of these stories have kind of taken a backseat to China virus, but they're openly threatening the Supreme Court, saying if you keep making decisions like this, you will reap the whirlwind, I think, to quote the senior senator from the great state of New York, which that kind of open threat to the judiciary from members of the legislative branch seems completely inappropriate.
That's right. You know, it seems like years ago at this point, but it was just over a month ago that Senator Schumer stood outside of the Supreme Court while they were hearing oral argument and threatened Justices Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh when they were hearing a case involving an abortion regulation in Louisiana, and essentially said, if you don't vote the way I want you to, you're going to suffer the consequences. And that's not the type of language and rhetoric we need to hear from, people at the highest levels of our government.
No, and I didn't like it either. If you remember, Elizabeth, back when Barack Obama was president, and they were deciding Obamacare, and the president at the time really wanted Obamacare to win the court's approval, and it appeared it was going to lose on a 5-4 vote. Instead, it won on a 5-4 vote after President Obama gave a speech in which he more than hinted broadly that the Supreme Court should decide the case a particular way. There's a reason we have three branches of government that are not co-equal. They don't have equal power. The judiciary has far more power than the legislative branch in a lot of ways, and both of those two branches have a lot more power than the executive. Is a relatively weak president in terms of what he's able to do. He has some extraordinary powers, but he's a weak, he can't spend a dime without the Congress saying so. And the courts can overrule him when they choose to do that. So people talk about co-equal branches of government, but in a lot of ways they're really not. But you can't have one branch of the government threatening the others.
That's right. And, if you look back at, this is many years ago now, as you say, President Obama effectively trying to lobby the justices when, his Justice Department was arguing the case before the Supreme Court. That seemed particularly inappropriate because he should have left it up to the lawyers in the Justice Department who were defending the law.
So what do we do to send the message that this kind of stuff has to stop? Because I guess I would ordinarily expect the fourth branch of government, the fourth estate of government, the journalists to do that and to shame these people like Schumer. But they don't seem willing to do that because Schumer's carrying water for the same kind of issues that the media seems to love.
Well, the way to stop politicizing the Supreme Court, it's hard work. We have to change the way we look at our courts. We have to respect the limits of judicial power. The Supreme Court is not there to update laws if Congress won't do it. It's not there to discover new rights if the people don't want to recognize them in state constitutions or in the federal constitution. And it's not there to resolve disputes between the political branches that should be worked out outside of court. So we need to change the way people view the court and the types of cases that are being brought to the court because it's really an outside influence that has been making the court seem political. The justices are doing their best to try to stay out of politics, but it's litigators, it's the other branches of government that are bringing politics into the court.
Couldn't agree with you more. Elizabeth, it's a pleasure as always. Thanks so much for what you do.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you on the program, and glad to take